Some of you know that I have two kids and that we speak three languages at home: Bulgarian, English, and German. And very often I get questions like, how do we do that? Why? Is there a certain rule? Do we do one parent, one language, or what exactly we do? And I thought maybe it's not just interesting to hear my perspective. So I think talking to Lindsay about that would give you more ideas of what is important when we raise our kids multilingually. Is there anything that you should pay attention to? Are there rules or certain games or ways to incorporate the languages in your everyday life? And maybe some examples of us, how we do it with our kids, and also from families and clients that we have, and we know what they do and what the results are. So let's start. Lindsay, what are your thoughts about raising kids multilingually?
Yeah, I have a lot of different perspectives because I also have two kids. So I can see it from the mom perspective, but I also have worked with a lot of bilingual kids. I mean, yeah, I worked with a lot of bilingual kids in Chicago, and I've also worked with a lot of bilingual kids here. And so I have a very different perspective as a teacher, and kind of the things that I saw other families do really influenced the way that I chose to raise my kids and a lot of the decisions that I made.
So I think that many people are asking that question when they are afraid that they might make a mistake, that they are afraid that if, for example, one of the parents is using two languages, that might cause confusion, or that the kids might not learn one of the languages or any of the languages appropriately. So what do you think? First of all, is it okay to mix languages?
Definitely. But I also think it's really, really important before you even start these conversations, not you and I personally, but that these parents are asking themselves, what's the goal here? I mean, what's your goal for your kids as far as Bulgarian? What's your goal with English? What's your goal with German? So I personally thought about this a lot while I was pregnant. So I would like my kids to have the option to study in the US if they want to. And so that means that my kids need to be able to speak English well, not perfectly. That's probably an unrealistic expectation, but they need to speak English well. They need to have a decent vocabulary. They need to be able to read and write by the time they're 18, 19, 20 years old. So if that's my goal, and perhaps I'll change that at some point, but at the moment, that's still my goal. So then I need to make sure that I'm reading and writing and speaking English with my kids a lot. And I work a lot on vocabulary acquisition. And there's a lot of different things we can talk about that at some point. But those are all things I'm thinking about. I don't know that you want your kids to study in Bulgaria. So that's maybe not something you're super worried about.
Exactly.
So what are your goals with Bulgarian, for example?
Right. So I never thought that far, if they're going to one day study in Bulgaria or not. My approach was more like, I want them to be able to talk to their relatives. Mm-hmm. I want them to know the language as far as they know where their roots are. And mm-hmm. when they're in Bulgaria, I want them to feel comfortable talking to people. So I started talking to my older son in Bulgarian maybe when he was two and a half. And the reason for that was that before that he was not speaking. Mm-hmm. So it was not like, I don't know how other mothers do it, but I don't think that, I was not sitting there and talking to my baby all the time. We talk sometimes, but sometimes I would say something in Bulgarian, something in English. I was going to a lot of classes with him, like swimming class or yoga class. And because I was in an international environment, he would hear me speaking English to a lot of people. Okay. And also at home with my husband, we spoke English. So I think the first exposure of both of my kids is more in English. Mm-hmm. And also when we're outside, we were speaking English to other people and to other kids. And he went to a English-speaking kindergarten. So English is a dominant language, definitely. Mm-hmm. However, I was also aware of the fact that if I don't speak Bulgarian to them, nobody will. Mm-hmm. And that's why I think when he was 2 years old, I decided we have to go to Bulgaria and stay there for the whole summer so that he can experience the language. Because even if I was speaking some Bulgarian to him, he would always answer in English. Mm-hmm. And then I thought, okay, he needs to see it in the country, to experience it with other people, not just from me, but from his grandmother or grandfather or other children on the street, other relatives. So that's why we spend always like a month and a half or 2 months in Bulgaria. And we do that every year since then.
Does your mother speak English?
No.
Okay. So he's really forced to when you guys are there.
Yes.
Which is great. Yeah. I mean, having any opportunity where you really push the kids to overcome any kind of hangups they have with the language is super important. I do that quite a bit with my kids as well. They speak a lot of English with me, but we do a lot of Danglish, you know. I'll pick them up and they'll be like, oh yeah, Mom, for Mittagessen we had, and I'm like, sometimes I let it go. Sometimes I will stop and be like, for what? What did you say? What are we talking about? And they know this game, and so they're okay with it. But it's nice to send them off to my family and have this situation where, like, if you do that, they will not understand you. You have to really stick to the language. And I think it's really helpful. It was also super cool to send them to Chicago last summer and give them the opportunity to like read signs. That was really the first time I saw them reading English in their environment. You know, we always read books at home, but to really walk around and say, oh, I know what that is. I'm learning to read in English. So that was exciting.
You have twins. So do you see a difference between them in their ability of speaking English or German?
No, I do not. I see a difference in their desire to read. So therefore, I would say, because my son loves to read, he reads all the time. He reads to me a lot, like he reads aloud, that he has probably a slightly larger vocabulary because lots of random words like summer solstice come up in books. And she is not as excited to read. And so I have to push her a little bit harder. And then she maybe won't sit and read an entire chapter. I can get her like 3 pages out of her. I mean,
so what age are they now?
9.
9. Okay.
Mm-hmm. 3rd grade.
3rd grade, 9 years old, twins. They're born in Germany.
Yes.
And raised in Germany by an American mother and a German father.
Correct.
And how did you start from the beginning? Like, were you speaking to them only in English when they were babies?
Constantly. I never stop talking. I'm very focused on every single thing that I do affects their English, and no one is helping me in the big scheme of things. You know, they learn a tiny bit from other people, but mostly I'm aware that I am 100% their teacher, and I have a lot of training in bilingual kids and stuff. So I have always spoken to them in English, and we've always done a lot of vocabulary exercises. I mean, even when they were like 1, I would walk around and kind of point out things, and that's what this is, and you know, all day. I mean, I was bored too, probably. That was a part of it. But I that comes very naturally to me. But my husband, for example, was terrified that they wouldn't be able to understand him. So for about 4 years, he only spoke English with them, which I honestly think gave us a really solid foundation to start with. And that has also contributed to the fact that their English is pretty good. They do make a lot of weird mistakes, though.
So but anyway, would you say that their English is better than their German?
No. I would say their German is only a tiny bit better than their English, though, which I think is a huge accomplishment for 9-year-olds.
Okay. So they, up to the age of 4, you both were speaking English to them at home.
Yeah.
When did they start going to kindergarten?
When they were 4. Yeah. And I think that's where my husband was like, okay, well, they speak German all day. They'll understand me if I speak German to them. And so he started, and maybe the Kita even suggested it at some point. Maybe they were a little worried too, but it all worked out fine. Like I said, their German's great now.
Do you remember how long it took them? Because basically German was kind of a foreign language to them.
I don't think it was a problem ever, because it's not that they never heard German. Like, their grandparents speak German, their cousins speak German. We took them to kind of like an outdoor, I don't even know how to call it. It's like a daycare type thing, but it's just outdoor, and it's like pay per use kind of. So they were always exposed to German. We had German babysitters and stuff like that. It's not that they never heard German. It was just not the language we spoke at home. And of course, they spent 90% of their time with us. So,
Okay, so you had also a babysitter from time to time.
Yeah, yeah.
And they were speaking German to them.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So, for example, I had a Hungarian babysitter.
Oh, cool.
And she spoke Hungarian to my son.
Mm-hmm.
So I was convinced that at the age of 2 or 3 or 4, he was understanding enough Hungarian to play also with the kids on the playground, or he was reacting like he was like, if she would tell him like, bring me the bowl or do this or do that, let's wash hands, let's sit down, let's eat, he would react appropriately to all of those commands.
Mm-hmm.
So now when we are, for example, recently we were in the cinema and there was a Hungarian family next to us, and I asked him like, do you recognize this language? He couldn't recognize it.
Oh, really?
And he's now 9. Yeah. So it was completely lost. Like he doesn't even recognize like simple words like hello and bye and excuse me, things like this that he heard a lot or was saying even by himself when he was small. So I think if somebody had the language for a very limited period of time, 2, 3, 4 years at a very young age, I don't think that they will remember anything from that if they don't practice it anymore.
Yeah. That being said, though, they might pick it up very quickly if they had an opportunity to.
You think that there is some...
Yeah, I think there's probably something in their subconscious. I don't know that for a fact, but I wouldn't be surprised if you put them in a situation where they had to speak Hungarian or they had the chance to learn it. Maybe they would pick it up quicker than some of the other kids.
But then back to what is the dominant language and what does it take for the kids to really speak a language well? Those are two very big questions, though. So I would like to say now, because you had twins, you didn't really had a big comparison what happens when you have a younger child. With my younger son, who is now 4.5, I noticed that his Bulgarian is by far not that good as with my first son.
Okay.
So the reason for that is also because between the kids, between each other, they speak English. They play in English and they watch movies in English. So when we're even in Bulgaria, we do the same thing. Every summer we're there. The younger one relies on his brother to translate.
There you go. Yeah.
So I want to say that it's not just about the environment, and it's not just about our intention as parents, how much we talk to them. It's also if the child is really forced, and I'm saying really forced to speak it.
Absolutely. And what topics they can talk about as well. I mean, I notice that a lot with my kids. They speak German to each other as well. So yeah, I think that whole like playing, like German is their play language. German is the kid language. So yeah, but also the topics they come home with where they're like, we learned about fire today, mommy. And then they're spitting off all these German words about fire because that's what they're learning in school and they want to tell me about it. They don't know any of those words in English. How would they? So
they start the sentence in English and then the word comes up, like a certain concept comes up in German, and they just say it in German.
Yeah. And sometimes they ask me, how do I say that? Or can you help me or something? But sometimes they just keep talking. So
do you interrupt them? Do you let them just say it? Do you is it your goal that they also learn the English word for that?
Yes. There are a couple words I don't care about. Sometimes I let it go. But in general, I would say, yeah, especially big ones like fire department and fireman and fire truck and all those things. Yeah, there are, again, like some things that I let go. But like they also make the funniest mistakes. Like they'll be like, yeah, mommy, our pottery class fell out today. That's also fun. So they are speaking English, they just make no sense.
But they translate like word by word.
Translate things word for word.
Which also adults do.
Oh, yeah.
When we learn a foreign language, we do a lot of transferring mistakes. Like we transfer from one language to the other. And sometimes it just doesn't work in that other language. Those are false friends.
Yep.
Which can be very, very funny.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think everybody does it. Kids, adults. But that's okay. Sometimes I correct them. Sometimes I don't. Do you think that it is important to correct them systematically and really all the time?
No, I think if you correct them all the time, they'll stop talking. I think you have to gently pick like which battles you want to go into and which ones you can let go. I mean, for example, like my kids have a really hard time with the TH sound. So when my son reads a whole chapter to me, I'm not going to stop him after every single word that has a TH in it. That would be murder. But I'll do it once or twice, something will come up that he had to say 3 times. And every time he said it wrong, they said, let's try that one more time. Let me see your tongue, So,
but your daughter doesn't have a problem with that.
She actually is pretty good with her, just in general. My son is, to be fair, in speech therapy for German too. But yeah, she's pretty good in general with like enunciating and just her pronunciation is pretty good.
Yeah, I think that's very individual. And I noticed, for example, with my neighbors' kids, that in German, they also lispen, like they have like this, and like certain words, it's really not very clear how they pronounce them. My kids had never a problem with the TH, but Michael, the younger one, cannot pronounce words with y. So instead of yellow, he says lelo.
We had that problem when the twins were little too. He might grow out of it. We used to do this game where we'd go yogurt, and they'd go logurt.
Yes, and that's totally normal.
Really?
It's a phase of learning. So I am not also very rigid in like constantly doing it. From time to time I say it, but I am sure that they will grow it out. And I would suggest that also to parents to not get very rigid about the correction.
Yeah.
Because I see it also with some other mothers in German. As soon as the kid is not saying the right past tense, they correct it, like especially with the irregular verbs. They correct it all the time. And I'm like, oh, come on, he'll learn it. Like, I don't know, maybe because my parents were teachers, I'm rebelling against parents being teachers. I think that's not their role. I think kids pick up a lot from their parents if we want it or not.
Yeah.
And we don't have to be like, no, this is wrong and this is right, and say it again and say it correctly. I'm more of a fan of them picking it up subconsciously than this formal educating of what is the correct one.
I would like to offer a third option. So what I personally enjoy and find most effective is to throw these things in a lot in playful ways. So if the child, for example, my kids say catched a lot instead of caught. And so they'll say caught or they'll say catched, and I will maybe let it go. But then I'll come back and I swear to God, my kids just think it's normal to talk this way, but I repeat myself all the time. And I'd be like, no way, you caught the ball? You caught it? How did you do that? How did you catch the ball like that? Show me how you caught the ball. And I will say it so many times and so emphatically and over the top that they don't notice that I'm correcting them, so they don't feel this, you did it wrong, correct yourself, get better. It's more of a like, oh, wow, mom is super interested in me. And I just really, they're very open to it. They're very receptive to that kind of teaching. So I definitely don't let it go, but I also don't be like rubbing it in their face that they made a mistake.
Yeah, I would do that only if I see that they are receptive for that. So not all the time, but I have phases or moments with my son, maybe when I pick him up from school and we're walking home. That's like the time when we can talk a little bit, or when he's listening to me. maybe he doesn't want to talk so much, because with us it's always like, how was your day? Good. And that's it. But then I start telling him about my day and what I did, and then I speak more than usual, or I try to use words that I know he doesn't know, so that's the input phase for me. Or at night when we go to bed, then I read stories to them, or I tell them about my day, and then I ask them how their day was, and then I help them to find the right words. But I would say I don't do it all the time. I think even when you have like certain phases or moments when you do it, that's fine. I would tell people not to beat up themselves if they don't do it all the time. The kids are going to learn the language anyway. And this is now when we come back to the goals, like what kind of goals you have. You cannot achieve a proficiency level in all languages at the same time. It's totally normal to have a dominant language in a certain phase, and it's okay to focus on that language for a while, and then maybe to focus on a different language for a while. It doesn't mean that you should completely ignore all the other languages, although at a very young age you did that. I also did that. But so there's two things that I want to say. First, I think it's never too late.
No.
You can always introduce a language or start speaking a little bit more in a language. Maybe not like from 0 to 100.
Yeah.
But even if you miss that phase, even if your kids are now 10 or 15, they heard you a little bit speaking that language. They know that you speak that language, and they associate it with you, even if they don't understand so much. You can always start slowly and build on it and say 2-3 more sentences, and then maybe switch back to the language they're comfortable with. But you can always introduce the language again. Doesn't matter how old the kids are. Yeah. And the other thing is, with the dominant language, I mean, in order to be able to go to university, they will have to go to school in that language. I mean, I don't think that if you're not a professional language teacher, you can build up the vocabulary, and you have to spend extremely a lot of time with those kids in order to build that vocabulary and all the subjects that they need to be able to speak or write or present or whatever you do in the different subjects, if they don't go to school in that language.
Yeah, totally. I mean, there's definitely a lot of pieces to it, but I mean, I think if it depends on your goals. Are you trying to get like 100, A pluses and a PhD in the USA, or do you want to just like do a semester abroad? I mean, I have a C2 exam in German. I could study here if I want to. Would it be easy for me? Would I crush it? No, I would be stressed out. I'd be working really hard.
Sure. It was an extra formal education for you. Now I'm speaking, if you were, for example, now the only source of English that they had.
Oh yeah, but I mean, my kids will learn English in school.
Exactly. So school is very important. But if you are, let's say, for example, for me, if I wanted to send my kids to Bulgaria to study in Bulgarian, I would not be able to teach them Bulgarian by myself to a level that they are able to go to university.
I agree.
And why? Because I don't speak to them in algebra, like all the subjects that they have in school, because all these subjects have vocabulary. There's so much, like the whole concepts that you learn in school are connected to the language. And it is not enough to just be a native speaker and talk about what you want to eat.
No, and I mean, especially, we can talk about that next time for sure, because I have quite a few interesting stories from my days as a teacher. But even if you talked about those random things and you felt like, okay, the vocabulary wise, I mean, you're not sitting down with your children, I'm assuming you're never going to do this, and writing essays with them and correcting their essays and really working through. And those are things where I 100% agree. You can't, as a parent, you can't do it by yourself. And that's why I can say it would be cool with me if they want to study in the US for a semester or something like that. I would like to prepare them to be able to do that, and the school will help me. I've worked with a lot of 12th graders here. Like, they're reading the newspaper from England and stuff. They're writing a lot of essays. In theory, they would be prepared for that. Yeah.
Now, having said that, I would not discourage people to try to teach the languages to their kids, but it doesn't mean that, I mean, it doesn't have to be like either they're going to university in that language or nothing.
Oh, right? Yeah, totally.
And you don't have to be a language teacher for that. Yesterday, I was talking to a German teacher in Italy, and she's Italian. Her whole family is Italian, and her son is now finishing school, and he had German in school, and she always helped him to speak better German so that he can apply maybe in Germany for university. Now, even if she's not a language teacher, even if she's speaking well German, because maybe she lived for many years in Germany, I would say, why not? Speak to your kid. It's not a bad thing. Many people are afraid that they say, I'm not a native speaker, although I speak very well English or German or whatever. I would never dare to teach my kid that language because they will learn all the mistakes from me.
They're going to learn mistakes either way. I mean, I don't make a lot of mistakes in English, and my kids still make lots of mistakes. And same with their German. They still say mit ohne, because we say without in English. I mean, they make lots of mistakes in both languages, and that doesn't mean that they can't do what they need to do. They get good grades in school. I mean, I think they're age-appropriate bilingual kids. But yeah, the point is, even kids who are growing up in a country, like my nieces and nephews, they make mistakes in English as well. And they live in Chicago. Both their parents are native speakers. Like, it's just normal that kids make those kinds of mistakes, like the irregular verbs or, little pronunciation things or whatever. Yeah.
Pronunciation is also a big topic. Like, many people think, because my English is not like a native, or my German doesn't sound like a native, I would never dare to teach my child.
Yeah. But I mean, that's such a great one, because the teachers at the school aren't native speakers either, and their pronunciation's not perfect either, but they're standing in front of your child, teaching your child English. So, what kind of damage are you going to do in comparison to them? You're still sending them to school, right? So, I think it's a really interesting topic. I really try to focus on teaching my kids, but also prioritizing our relationship. So where, does the balance lie between being a good teacher and being a great mom, and mom always wins, Yeah. Yeah. My relationship with them is more important to me than whether or not they someday want to or could study in the US.
Of course. Yeah. The emotional connection, the way you have fun together and communicate with each other is more important than having them speaking 3 languages at the age of 6. But I know of families, for example, that also have their kids learning 5 languages simultaneously.
Wow.
Yeah. So in Budapest, for example, a friend of mine was Greek, or she is still Greek. So she was speaking in Greek with them. Their father speaks Arabic. In kindergarten, they were speaking Hungarian, and they still had lessons in English and French, maybe.
Fascinating.
Yeah, and she had like tutors coming in to teach them English and French. Yeah, so for them, it was important that the kids learn as many languages as possible, because some pediatrician told them that up to 5 languages is no problem.
I would be really interested to sit down and talk to her about her life and what's going on. And I mean, that's next level. I've never met somebody who's done so many languages.
I can invite her to the show.
That would be fun.
Yeah. So I think it's very interesting what they're doing. And I met the kids. Obviously, I talked also to them. And that's the thing. I don't see a problem with that. Like, it's not a problem you can also teach them 7 languages at the same time if you want, or 10. For kids, as long as they enjoy it, as long as they have fun, and they pick it up, why not? But I would not do it on purpose. Like, I think 2 or 3 languages, if they have the exposure anyway, and if the constellation is such, it's not and it's not about being a problem or not being a problem. It's a very natural way of growing up if that's your environment.
Yeah.
But I don't think that I would hire extra tutors to have them learn another language just because now is the time to learn languages. I think you can always learn a language at any age.
I agree with that totally. I don't think that you need to stress out about they have to start earlier. It's not going to work. I mean, I was 18 when I started speaking German, and I would say I've done pretty well for myself. My accent's good, stuff like that. I'm not stressed about that at all. Yeah, no, I agree. I don't think the age thing really matters. I think it's more of a, what are you up for as a family? You know?
Yeah.
Where, and I mean, we've talked about that topic before, but where's like too much pressure, for you as a family?
Yeah. Yeah. And also, what languages are they speaking? Do you think that there are languages that are more important than others?
There are languages that more people speak than others. So, I mean, in theory, one could say that like Spanish is a super, super important language because so many people, continents of people speak Spanish, right? But I mean, if you personally never have the opportunity to speak Spanish, then it's not important to you. So, and I mean, I do speak Spanish, but I've been living in Germany for 12 years now. And I am so rusty because I have almost no chances to use it, which I find super unfortunate. But again, in other stages of my life, I was speaking Spanish every day. So yeah, I think it really just matters what's going on in your life and where you're at.
I have an example of a Russian family that is speaking only in German with their kids because they don't want them to get confused, and because they live in Germany, so they think, well, it's more beneficial anyway to learn German, and the kids don't need Russian. In that case, Russian is the more frequent, or the language that is spoken more than German.
Right. There are more people that speak Russian. Yeah.
Right. But in that case, they decided that because they live in Germany, it's more important for the kids to speak German, and they don't want to confuse them.
I totally respect whoever's choices to do whatever they decide to do with that. I think it's a little bit of the fear of confusion, though, I don't agree with. So, I mean, if they just don't want to speak Russian with them for whatever reason, that's super fine with me. I absolutely respect everybody's choices, but I've really never had an issue with confusion. I mean, never. I can imagine if kids are learning super many, I mean, that would be a question that I would ask your friend with the 5 languages. Do they ever get confused with, because 5 seems like a lot to me, but that might be my own personal fear. That might not be a reality at all for her family. It has never been an issue with my kids. They never get confused.
I think it's situation based. Like if they're around kids that speak Hungarian, they would speak Hungarian, or if the